So welcome to today's state and federal programs meeting. This is the first SFP meeting, directors meeting for the 23-24 school year. It's so hard to believe that we're just days away from October. I just really can't even fathom that. I'm Adrienne Balcazar, and today I'm joined by my colleagues, Helen Choi, Anita Lomeli, Debbie Cano, Rachel Garcia, and Jeannie Key. And I'd like to also introduce the newest member of our team, Augustine Garcia. He is 17 days new to us, and we are happy that he has joined our team. I'd also like to introduce our clerical support, Maribel Leyva, who, if you call, you'll definitely hear her charming voice, as well as if you email, she will respond to you. So again, we are excited to have a full team, and we're still looking to grow with one more person. So again, if you would like to join, or you know somebody that would love to read LCAPs and support federal programs, there's my plug. So, okay, LACO is in the middle of changing the organization's website. So in order to access today's presentation, we ask you to please click on the link in the chat. The presentation can be accessed through the icon as shown here. The agenda and resources are listed and available as well. If you are new to our meetings, we do record our meetings and we will post them soon. We also provide Q&As that we take from the chat, so you'll be able to find it here at this location. As in the past, please place your questions in the chat box and we will answer the simple ones if we can. But many times your questions are not quite simple answers, so we will follow up with written responses in a Q&A that will be emailed to you and again posted as shown previously. You can also find the Q&As from the past, slides and handouts from our previous meetings here at this link. So again, sometimes when you go back and you remember we talked about something in the past, I know I do that. I'll go back and follow this link. So again, we leave this for you, to access that. Okay, so before we get started with today's meeting, I want to let those of you who are new to us let you know that we have a state, new to the state and federal programs, that our unit creates and provides a state and federal compliance checklist. And if you follow the link on this slide, it will take you to our publications webpage, where you can purchase the district and school level compliance checklists. And with that purchase, you will receive both checklists electronically, and this will allow you to, it's in Word documents, so it allows you to personalize it with your own reminders as well. So just for those of you that are new to us, this is available, and it is definitely a way to keep federal and state program requirements within the timeline of your school year. So again, just wanting to let you know that. Okay, so let's get started with today's meeting. Here's the agenda for today. You might have noticed that our agenda format has changed. We just wanted to make sure that it was very clear to you what topics are related to federal programs and which ones are related to the state programs. So today, within the federal programs, you're going to hear about the Carissa Liquidation Extension Application, the Title I annual meeting, time and effort reporting, the Title I comparability, universal meals and the student poverty measures, the FPM update, and then some required notifications, specifically these 4 of the UCP annual notice, the 4-week letter, the parents' right to know, public notice regarding educational rights of homeless children and youth. Within the state programs, today you're going to hear about the educator effectiveness funds, and of course our LCAP update with specifically the 23-24 timeline for the LCAP process, your mid-year report, and the template revisions that are taking place as we speak. And then we'll end with some reminders about the Title III annual survey, the 15% translation requirement, and the California dashboard local indicators. So again, This is, we have a full agenda today. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Helen, who's going to speak about the Carissa liquidation extension application.
Thank you, Adrian, and good morning, everyone. My name is Helen Choi. I'm one of the coordinators here at the LCAP-State unit, and I'll be discussing the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriation Act, or better known as Carissa Act, liquidation extension application. If the LEA is approved for a liquidation extension, allowable activities properly obligated by September 30th, 2023 could be completed for up to 14 additional months after the standard liquidation timeline. So let's delve into this a little further. So the process is only applicable to Carissa Act funds based on the guidance from the U.S. Department of Ed. So this is not applicable to any other federal stimulus funding source, and the approval may extend the liquidation period only, not the obligation deadline. So all obligations still must be properly occurred by September 30th, 2023. It's just right around the corner. Additionally, approval must be provided by both the CDE and the U.S. Department of Education, and that approval is not guaranteed. The U.S. Department of Education has stated in their guidance that the intention of this process is for LEAs to have additional time to liquidate properly obligated funds in response to those unexpected delays that are being experienced. This is not meant to be a general practice to just simply allow for additional time for expenditures. The Carissa liquidation extension application will be applicable to the fund sources listed here on the slide. Please take a moment to read the slide as a reference. And again, the process is applicable to these fund sources only. The obligation deadline for all Carissa Act funds is again when? September 30th, 2023. The standard liquidation period for all recipients of these funds is 120 calendar days following the obligation deadline. This means that without any extension, Carissa Act funds properly obligated by September 30th, 2023 may be liquidated until January 29th, 2024. For projects receiving approval through the liquidation extension request process, the deadline can be extended up to 14 additional months, giving LEAs the opportunity to liquidate funds properly obligated by September 30, 2023 until March 31st, 2025. And as a reminder, there is no opportunity to extend the obligation deadline for these funds. I do want to clarify the difference between obligation and liquidation deadline for these funds because we're often asked questions about them. According to the Code of Federal Regulations, an obligation refers to orders that are placed for property and services, contracts and subawards made, and similar transactions that require payment. However, obligations are considered to have occurred at different times depending on what the specific activity is. In the next slide, we will see the 34 CFR section 76.707, which provides a chart of when we can consider obligations to have occurred based on the different types of activities. So this is a chart from 34 CFR 7.707, which lists the type of obligations and when the obligation is made. Please be reminded that any projects that you're applying for liquidation extension must have been obligated by September 30th, 2023. We're also often asked, how do we know when the funds have been liquidated? Liquidation occurs when the goods and services have been received and the payment has been completed. As noted, the LEAs must ensure that the activities, even partially funded through federal funds, are fully completed within the applicable grant timeline. So as an example, if an LEA has entered into a contract with the vendor to install HVAC equipment, the obligation is liquidated when the full contract scope of work is finished and the LEA has completed payment for those services. It is important to note that in accordance with the Code of Federal Regulations, the payment and activities for obligations must be completed within the allowable grant period. In most cases, it would not be allowable for activities to continue beyond the grant period, even if the LEA pays in advance or if the LEA only partially pays for the activities with those funds, federal funds. So let's say that the LEA prepays for a 5-year subscription for a data analysis software to support, to address the impact of lost instructional time using ESSER II funds. And let's say the subscription is purchased on August 1st, 2022, and is active from August 1st, 2022 through July 31st, 2027. From this information, the purpose of the subscription aligns with the allowable uses of funding source. However, in the event of audits or monitoring, this purchase is likely to be found unallowable because the obligation occurred prior to September 30th deadline. However, the standard liquidation deadline for ESSER II funds is January 29, 2024. And since the subscription would still be continuing beyond that liquidation deadline, the liquidation is not occurring within the allowable grant period, and the full cost would most likely be determined unallowable, not just the portion that are paid outside of the grant period. In this situation, even if the LEA were to apply for a liquidation extension, this still would not likely reflect an allowable use of funds because the liquidation extension could only be through March 31st, 2025, and the subscription would still be continuing outside of the extended liquidation period. So when submitting an application in accordance with the guidance from U.S. Department of Education, LEAs will be required to provide supplemental documentation to substantiate the timely obligation of CRRSA Act funds and the nature of the delay. Additionally, by submitting the application, the LEA provides assurance that it agrees to have additional reporting and monitoring requirements as applicable to the extended liquidation period. This may include continued quarterly and annual reporting beyond the current projected timelines, so that way liquidation of funds can be tracked within the extended liquidation period. As an important consideration, the final bullet point here, if the application is ultimately not approved, the LEA may be required to transfer all applicable project costs to a different allowable funding source, not just the portion that can't be liquidated within the standard grant timeline. Each submitted applications may only describe one single project. The LEA should not consolidate multiple separate projects into a single form. Additionally, each application may only describe one fund source here. So for example, if there is a single project that's being funded through multiple different funding sources, the separate application must be submitted for each portion of the project that's covered by each resource code. And please note that the CDE has indicated that the application should be submitted by November 1st, 2023, as CDE will be submitting recommendation to USDE by December 2023. So here are some things for LEAs to consider and reflect. Okay. What projects are obligated with ESSER II funds? Will the project be liquidated within the 120 days of the obligation deadline? And if not, will the liquidation extension cover the project to be liquidated within the extended timeline of March 31st, 2025? And what supplemental documentation is available to substantiate the timely obligation and the nature of the delays? Additional information can be accessed through the Liquidation Extension Request Application section of the CRRSA Act funding page website listed here. And for questions, you can also contact these departments listed here respectively. Thank you. And now I'll be also covering the Title I annual meeting. Again, this portion of the presentation, I'll be discussing the Title I annual meeting in which all schools receiving Title I Part A funds are required to convene for parents of participating students. The purpose of the Title I annual meeting is to inform parents and family members about the Title I program and the requirements. There are two types of Title I programs. There's the Targeted Assistance School Model and the School-Wide Program Model. The Targeted Assistance School Model is the default program for Title I schools, and the services must be supplemental to what is being provided to all students at the school. Additionally, the Targeted Assistance School Program services are provided to eligible students based on multiple objective and academically related criteria. And in both Targeted Assistance School and school-wide programs, all activities strategies, and interventions must be evidence-based. During this meeting, you are required to provide what participation in Title I program means, including a description and explanation of the school's curriculum, information on academic assessment used to measure student progress, the proficiency levels of students are expected to meet, district parental involvement policy, school parent involvement policy, and the district school's parent compact, and the right of parents to become involved in the school's program and the way to do so. Also explain to the parents that they have the right to request opportunities for regular meetings for parents to formulate suggestions and to participate in decisions about education for their children. The school must respond to any such suggestions as soon as practically possible. As stated previously, both school-wide programs and targeted assistance school with Title I Part A funds are required to convene an annual meeting at a convenient time in which all parents of participating children must be invited and encouraged to attend. The meeting is to inform parents of their school participation under Title I Part A and to explain the requirements of the Title I Part A and the right of the parents to be involved. Included in the resource share, the link shared today, is a sample Title I annual parent meeting presentation for you to use, credited in part to LA Unified School District. Here's a little peek at the sample presentation. Please note that the presentation will vary between school-wide programs and the targeted assistance program. And here are a few sample slides from the presentation. This is sample presentation overview. Please note that it should be either school-wide programs or targeted assistance, depending on the school program, and be sure to state the purpose of Title I. Also provide and share schools 23-24 Title I ranking and the 23-24 Title I allocation, and share what makes up a Title I family activities. SSC and SPSA are an important part of the school-wide programs, and sharing that information with parents is crucial in developing and monitoring the SPSA. And finally, as shown on this slide, CDE recommends the 7-step process in developing and annually reviewing your school plan, which includes analyzing student achievement data, measuring the effectiveness of your current strategies, and monitoring the implementation of the school plan. The full sample presentation is shared with you in our resources, the link that we shared today, and should be customized to meet the needs of your school. Thank you, and now I'll turn it over to Anita for time and effort reporting.
Okay, hi everyone. Well, thank you, Helen. In the next slide, we will address reporting requirements for all federal education programs and a few state restricted programs. And I know with the huge influx of federal awards over the past few years, this requirement may have loomed exponentially in your LEA, and it's always a good time to review time and effort reporting. Next slide, please. Okay, so to begin, whenever personnel are compensated in salary or wages with federal awards money, such as your Title I, your Title III, ESSER, IDEA, Migrant Ed, etc., time and effort documentation that accurately reflects the work performed by the employee must be collected, reviewed, and kept on file. The Code of Federal Regulations listed on this slide here establish uniform administrative requirements that must be met in order to meet compliance and to ensure the retention of the LEA's federal award. No matter how big, how small, whether it's $1 or 100,000, all employees who are paid with federal grant award money in whole or part must report time and effort. The beginning of the school year offers an opportunity for LEAs to take inventory of their written policies and procedures regarding time and effort reporting. These written policies and procedures should include information on why time and effort reports are required, what could happen if time and effort reports are not completed accurately, which positions or personnel complete the time and effort reports, how often, which form is used, and when the form is submitted and to whom. An LEA must use the same time and effort reporting procedures for all of its federal grants. Please note that the LEA's written policies and procedures will be requested during an FPM review or an audit. Personnel may also be interviewed during an FPM review and ask questions about the LEA's process. And for this reason, it's always a good idea to train all staff paid with federal award monies on time and effort reporting procedures. And whether it's through the onboarding process, at an annual staff meeting, via an LEA memo, a recorded video, train all staff who will have part in time and effort reporting process. And this definitely includes all staff who are paid by a single or multiple cost objective. Consider any other employee who would benefit from knowing about the policies and procedures, such as your program coordinators, your school principals, administrative assistants, and business personnel. Be sure to include personnel who are part of the LEA's internal controls, such as the designated personnel who are responsible for reviewing the submitted time and effort reports and making all necessary adjustments so that the final amount charged to the federal award is accurate, allowable, and properly allocated. This is like your AAA insurance. And by ensuring compliance of these uniform administrative requirements at the onset and making sure that all implicated personnel are trained, you can be confident that your LEA will have more time to direct energies to meet the mission of the grant programs and prepare for a less stressful FPM review and audit. So some agenda considerations. During the LEA's training for time and effort reporting, ensure that your personnel control documents are up to date so that federally funded employees and supervisors know which form they'll be completing throughout the year and how often. Multi-funded employees will complete and submit a PAR form each month. Employees paid from a single cost will submit a semi-annual certification form twice a year. By the end of the LEA's training, employees should feel confident understanding the LEA's written policies and procedures. Employees should know processes such as where will they obtain the reporting form? Will someone from the district office email the form at the end of the month? Or will the forms be available on the LEA's website or the internal form library? On which date of the month are the forms due? To whom will the employee submit the form? Do site administrators sign the form, or does the employee submit it to a program coordinator at the district office? Perhaps depending on the size of the LEA or the number of federal programs being implemented, a flow chart that informs personnel of the process could be helpful. The entire process of time and effort reporting is a part of an LEA's internal controls. The FPM instruments for all federal and state programs in review this school year are also extremely helpful when shoring up your time and effort reporting requirements. And as we close out this topic of training for your LEA's federally funded employees and any personnel involved throughout the process for time and effort reporting, here are some additional resources should you need or desire additional information. The first two resources listed on this slide are extensive, but definitely noteworthy. The third resource listed has a link that will take you to all the 23-24 FPM instruments. And as always, please know that the LACO team is available to support you. All right, take it away, Rachel.
Thank you, Anita. Hello, everyone. So in this next section, we're going to be reviewing Title I, Part A, Comparability. So LEAs receiving Title I, Part A funds must demonstrate that all schools are providing comparable services using state and local funds. And keep in mind that this is a prerequisite for receiving Title I, Part A funds. And so the purpose of this requirement is to ensure that LEAs provide at least the same amount of funding to schools receiving Title I funds as they do to non-Title I schools. So comparability is determined on a school-by-school basis, but the calculation is made at the district level. And so the calculations must be completed on an annual basis and in a timely manner to ensure that all schools are in a comparable position, and also to allow the district to make necessary adjustments with the least amount of disruption, and to avoid the loss of Title I Part A funding. So to meet comparability requirements, LEAs must file a written assurance with the state, also develop procedures for compliance with comparability requirements, and maintain documentation demonstrating that the calculations are conducted annually. And when completing these calculations, LEAs must confirm that the student to full-time equivalent teacher ratios fall within a reasonable variance. And so in California, this has been determined to be a 30% variance. So the written assurance is filed with the state through the spring CONAP. And this is when LEAs complete and submit the certification of assurances form. And so LEAs must assure that they have established and implemented a district-wide salary schedule, as well as policies to ensure equivalence among schools in staffing and in the provision of materials and supplies. And so here on the slide, you can see a screenshot of all of the legal assurances that are included in the CONAP, as well as a screenshot of the comparability assurances. So LEAs must use student enrollment to full-time equivalent teacher ratios to determine whether schools are comparable. And this can be done in one of two ways. So either by comparing all schools within the LEA as a whole, or by comparing all schools within the LEA by each grade span group. And again, as previously mentioned, the student to full-time equivalent teacher ratios must fall within a 30% variance. And so if schools are not comparable, then the LEA must make adjustments to ensure that all schools are comparable. And so completing these calculations early will allow the LEA to make any needed adjustments with the least amount of disruption. The CDE recommends that LEAs complete these calculations and make any needed adjustments in staffing or funding by October 31st of each year. So there are several exclusions that may apply when determining comparability. So first, LEAs are not required to include any unpredictable changes that occur after the beginning of the school year, such as changes in student enrollment or personnel assignments. Schools with 200 or less students may also be excluded from the calculations. And if the LEA is a single school LEA or has only one school for each grade span group, then the comparability requirement does not apply. LEAs may also exclude state or local funds expended for language instruction programs and the excess cost of providing services to students with disabilities. And lastly, LEAs may exclude state and local funds expended under SS Section 1113B1D and 1113C2B for programs that meet the intent and purposes of Title I, Part A. Additionally, there are several school types that are exempt from meeting the comparability requirements. And so this includes alternative schools of choice, continuation high schools, county community schools, district community day schools, juvenile court schools, opportunity schools, public special education schools, and also youth authority schools. So the CDE has developed calculation forms to assist LEAs with this process. And the forms provide LEAs with immediate information on whether or not a school meets comparability. The instructions and calculation forms, as well as other resources related to comparability, can be accessed on the CDE website at the link provided on the slide. And so these calculation forms are in Excel format, and they provide LEAs with the option to determine comparability either LEA-wide or by grade span group. And so the screenshot that's included on the slide is a screenshot of the calculation by LEA-wide average. So when completing the comparability forms, LEAs will need to enter the school name, school type, grade span group code, student enrollment, and total full-time equivalent teachers for all schools included in the school student counts report in CARS. And the last two columns in the spreadsheet will automatically populate based on the student enrollment and FTE teacher information entered. And so it's the last column that will indicate whether or not the school is comparable. And so keep in mind, if you calculate the comparability based on one method, such as the LEA-wide average, and you find that a school is not comparable, it's recommended that you try the other option. So that would be the grade span group average to determine comparability. If after trying both options, a school is still not comparable, then the LEA would need to make adjustments to meet the comparability requirements. And so one important thing to remember is that the student enrollment data and full-time equivalent teacher data must be captured on the same date for every school within the LEA. So you'll want to maintain documentation that this data is captured on the same date. And then one last reminder is that the calculations should only include teachers whose salaries are paid using state and local funds. So if you have teachers who are split funded, be sure to calculate the FTE using only the percentage of the salary paid with state or local funds. So here we see an example of a completed comparability form based on the LEA-wide average. So in this example, you can see that middle school A is not comparable. So in this case, you would try the other option, which would be the grade span group average. And as mentioned, the calculation forms are in Excel format. And so the nice thing is that once you complete the information in the LEA-wide average tab, it will automatically populate the data for each school into the grade span group tabs. So you won't have to enter the information again. And so also in this form or in this example, you can see that two schools are exempt as indicated in the last column. So elementary school C is exempt because it has less than 200 students, and high school B is exempt because it is a continuation school. And so this form will automatically populate the last column with exempt if the school has 200 or fewer students, or if it meets one of the school type exemptions. So in this next example, we see the example based on the grade span group average. And so you'll see the same elementary and middle school data from the previous slide. And so the first screenshot shows the elementary grade span group, and the second one shows the middle school grade span group. So you can see that by using the grade span group average calculation, that middle school A is now comparable. So in this example, it worked out for middle school A using the grade span group option. However, if after trying both options, a school is still not comparable, then the LEA would need to make adjustments in staffing or funding to meet the comparability requirements. So LEAs must develop written procedures for compliance with comparability requirements. And so the procedures should include the LEA's timeline and process for demonstrating comparability. It should also include the office responsible for completing the calculations, as well as the description of how and when any adjustments are made in schools that are not comparable. And so LEAs must maintain source documentation to support the comparability calculations, as well as any documentation related to any adjustments made to ensure comparability. And so keep in mind that it's required that LEAs maintain this documentation for 3 years after completion of the activity for which funds were used. However, we recommend maintaining the documentation for 5 years. And so as a reminder, comparability requirements are monitored through the FPM process. And so specifically in Compensatory Education Instrument Item 14. And so just some examples of evidence requests for this item would include completed LEA comparability calculation forms, the current district-wide salary schedule, the LEA's policy to ensure equivalence amongst schools in teachers, administrators, and other staff, and the LEA's policy to ensure equivalence among schools in the provision of materials and supplies. And also evidence of local governing board approval of the comparability policy. So if your LEA receives Title I Part A funds, it will be important to verify that your LEA has these required policies and procedures in place and is annually completing the comparability calculations. And so that concludes my section. So I will now turn it over to Adrian for universal meals.
Thank you, Rachel. Today, we want to bring attention to your attention the requirements of the Universal Meal Program and how this connects to your student poverty measures that are needed for your Title I program. Next slide, please. The California Universal Meals Program has requirements. One is that it requires public schools, charter schools, and county offices of education to provide breakfast and lunch to all students each school day free of charge. It also requires schools with an identified student percentage of 40% or more to apply for federal provision. So this would include students who are directly certified for programs such as CalFresh, CalWorks, or Medi-Cal. LEAs are required to make eligibility determinations. So you must collect meal applications. And for this, alternative income forms cannot be used in lieu of meal applications. And you must conduct direct certification 3 times a year, but the CDE does recommend monthly. And LEAs are still required to conduct verification and complete the annual verification report. And so currently the verification report or the verification must be completed by November 15th. And the verification report is due before January 15th. So we want you to keep this on your radar for those of you that are not necessarily part of the nutrition program, but it does apply if you're running a Title I program. The California Universal Meals Program is built upon the school's nutrition programs. So in order to be reimbursed for universal meals, California Universal Meal Program says you must participate in the school breakfast program and the National School Lunch Program as well. And then California will provide additional state funds to supplement the federal meal reimbursement. And the requirements for California are that you must participate in the school breakfast program and the National School Lunch Program. You must serve compliant meals, and you must count these meals by the type. So how many are free, reduced price, or paid. As part of the implementation of the Title I program, you also have to identify the number of low-income students. And the purpose of the school student counts data collection form is for the LEAs to report the low-income measurement, the school ranking method, the total student enrollment count of all students, and the eligible low-income students that are age 5 through 17 years only, these counts. ESSA also requires an LEA to rank from highest to lowest all of its school attendance areas according to the percentage of students from low-income families and serve such eligible schools in rank order. So there are many measurements of poverty, but what's most commonly used, and that's why we bring it to your attention today, is because the free and reduced price lunch under the Richard B. Russell National School Lunch Act, most people utilize that meal application. So the fact is that now students receive free breakfast and lunch But there is a dilemma because now that students receive free breakfast and lunch, the district still must collect meal applications in order to receive reimbursement for federal as well as from the state. And it's also used if you use this as a measurement of poverty. So the dilemma is, and many school districts and charters have seen this, in that parents, there's not an urgency for parents to fill it out and submit it. So again, in reflection, as you are looking forward and working with your nutrition services, how do you collect the meal applications from families, and how do you inform your families about the importance of the meal applications, even though their child may be receiving a free breakfast and lunch? And so some districts have done incentives. So what incentives do you have in place to motivate your families to submit these free and reduced lunch applications? So again, there is a tie to your Title I program, as well as keeping in mind that those dates are coming up of verification in November and in January. So there's time today, there's time in October to make sure that everyone is working towards this and really working together collectively to motivate the families to submit the meal applications. Because if you look and plan it through or think it through, how does this affect the ranking and serving of the Title I, at the schools? And would schools receive less funds and that they count on, and so forth? So again, it's important. And so here's some resources if you do need more information regarding the universal meals and the school nutrition program directory. Now we're just going to go briefly over FPM and the update. As you know, the federal program monitoring reviews are organized by a continuous cycle. This table here shows the FPM cycle schedule by school year. And for those of you that are new, this is how CDE organizes all of the LEAs and charters. The cycle here is shown that every 2 years, there is an online and an on-site review. All of the LEAs in the state of California are placed in one of the 4 groups or cohorts. They call them cohorts. And so they're labeled cohort A, B, C, and D. And so you can see here for the column of the 23-24 school year that cycle B is on for an on-site review, and cycle D is online review for this year. And you notice at the bottom that in the past, there were 126 districts and charters reviewed for the last 2 years. But you do see that there are 10 less identified, and that probably is due to the staffing at CDE, in that it, there still is the same need. However, the staffing at CDE is requiring less to be reviewed. So it is what it is. So we'll see for next year, what number that will be. So that'll be to be continued. If you are selected for an FPM, here you can see this is the LA charters, and these are the ones that are selected and highlighted in yellow. You can see that the state groups the LEAs by region, such as the Mid-Cities LEAs or the Southwest LEAs. And so you can see here that who's up for reviews this year. If you are selected this year for an FPM review, the table here identifies the components of the FPM review within each of the different formats. So if you're selected for online, this applies to both online and on-site. You must upload your evidence to the CMT. If you are on site, you have that added component of face-to-face FPM activities. So if you're on site, you have an entrance meeting. You're going to your employees funded through federal programs will have interviews. The the school site council will be interviewed. The ELAC and DLAC and any other advisory committees will be interviewed. And then there's an exit meeting. So again, depending on which program or which format you're being reviewed will determine your preparation for the FPM review. Here is a list of the programs included for this year, and this you can find on CDE's website at the link below. And I just want to point out that there are 19 program instruments uploaded to the CDE FPM webpage. Newly posted this past Monday are 4 instruments, and you can see them with the date of 9/25/23, and these are the CTE, the CCR, the Early Education Division, and your Education Equity instruments. These 4 have been uploaded, so it's important that everyone downloads them, whether you're being reviewed this year or not, to make sure that you can see if there's any changes in requirements, either more or less, but usually it's more. And so, you know, it's available now. Also new on this slide, you can see the bolded fiscal monitoring, and this FM review is now been placed back. It was taken off for a couple of years due to the fiscal team at CDE spending most of their time and effort on reviewing the CARES Act and those funds. And so now they are going back to adding the fiscal monitoring. So again, those requirements never left, but now they are back in the forefront. So again, making sure if you're new, make sure that you download that one as well. And so depending on what programs you participate in, you want to make sure that you download every year the most up-to-date instrument, and you need to see what are the requirements so you can ensure that if you were selected, and if not, you have all of the evidence that you would need. And remember, when you submit the CONAP, your superintendent assures by signing those assurances that you will follow all of the rules and you will maintain your records as required. And so, and now we have just FPM trainings and resources. So for those LEAs and charters that are being reviewed this year, the CDE contained or maintained the virtual training like they have in the past few years. They find that they get obviously more people attend, so information goes out to more people. So it was held on August 4th through the 1st through the 4th in August, and all of the resources and materials are held in what CDE calls the box. And so this link here is for the 23-24. Now, this is not just for people being reviewed, this is for everyone. And so we share it so that everyone knows what's the latest information from each of the programs and in terms of FPM and legal requirements. I will say, and maybe next month, I'll add last year's link as well, because last year they gave a lot more samples of what's a compliant evidence, where this year it's different. It's more presentation and less samples. So I find I toggle between both. So I'm sure that was a source for all of you as well. And so with that, now I will turn it over to Debbie.
Thank you, Adrienne. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. We are going to review some required notifications for you. So there are 4 different required notifications: the UCP annual notice, parents' right to know letter, 4-week letter, the public notice regarding educational rights of homeless children and youth. Next slide, please. Our first required notification is the Uniform Complaint Procedures annual notice. LEAs are required to annually notify in writing its educational partners of their UCP process. This includes notifying students, employees, parents or guardians, district and school advisory committees such as ELAC, SSC, and DLAC, as well as private school officials and other interested parties. On the slide, you can see a screenshot of the sample CDE UCP annual notice, as well as a link to the CDE sample. Now, you're not required to use this particular sample. However, this sample does include all required language and components that must be included in the annual notice. If you don't use this sample, you'll need to ensure that all required language and components are included in your notice. A critical required component that the annual notice must include is the title of the position responsible for processing complaints and the name and contact information of the person currently holding that position. This should be the same information that's included in the LEA's UCP policies and procedures. Additionally, it's important to note that this is monitored through the FPM process, specifically item 2 in the UCP program instrument. Remember, the FPM instruments, as Adrian just shared with you, are very good tools to determine whether your policies, procedures, and documents are appropriate and up to current expectation. Next slide, please. So our next required notification is the parent's right to know letter. This notification is required for LEAs receiving Title I Part A funds. Each LEA receiving Title I Part A funds must notify the parents of each student attending a school that receives Title I funds that the parents may request the professional qualifications of the student's classroom teachers, and that the district will provide upon that request this information in a timely manner. This notice must be sent at the beginning of the school year. We've included a link to the CDE sample parents' right to know letter that the LEAs may use to meet this requirement. Again, this requirement is also monitored through the FPM process in 2 programs, compensatory education, item 8, and also supporting effective instruction, item 13. Next slide, please. Next, and again, for schools that receive Title I funds, they're required to provide to each individual parent of a child who is a student in a class that has been taught for 4 or more consecutive weeks by a teacher who does not meet the applicable state certification or licensure requirements at the grade level and or subject area in which the teacher has been assigned. Again, this notification must be sent in a timely manner. So this is if the district knows that an assignment will go beyond the 4 weeks, they should prepare this letter to be sent at that 4-week mark. This notice only needs to be sent to the parents of the student in that classroom, not school-wide. Next slide, please. This chart highlights the criteria for determining if the 4-week letter is triggered. As you can see in the chart, if the teacher holds a clear or life level 1, level 2, intern or subject matter authorization or preliminary credential in the grade level or in the subject areas in which the teacher is providing instruction, then the 4-week letter is not triggered. However, the 4-week letter is triggered with either ineffective, out-of-field teachers, as well as emergency substitute documents that can be, you can see the specific certification and permits that fall under each of those categories. And this information is aligned to the CDE's current information on their website, and you can find additional information on the updated definitions at the link there provided. And the 4-week letter is also monitored through the FBM process in both compensatory education, item 8, and supporting effective instruction, item 13. Next slide, please. And lastly is a notice that is regarding the educational rights of children and youth experiencing homelessness. LEAs are required to ensure that public notice of the educational rights of children and youth experiencing homelessness is disseminated at locations frequented by parents and guardians of homeless children and youth and unaccompanied youth, including locations such as schools, shelters, public libraries, and food pantries. The CDE has posters that are translated into various languages, outlining the educational rights of children and youth experiencing homelessness that the LEAs can download. We've included a screenshot of the CDE poster on the slide, as well as a link to the poster. The CDE also has guidance documents for disseminating educational rights that provide some best practices and strategies to consider. We've also included the link to this guidance document and the link to the CDE's resources for homeless children and youth webpage. It is also important to note that LEAs must inform school personnel, service providers, advocates working with homeless families, and parents and guardians of homeless children and youth of the duties of the LEA homeless liaison. Additionally, the list of the liaisons in the LEA and their contact information must be posted on the LEA's website, along with specific information on homelessness, including information on the educational rights and resources available to persons experiencing homelessness. The public notice regarding the educational rights of homeless children and youth and the notice regarding the LEA's liaisons duties, including the posting requirements, is monitored through the FPM process as well in the Homeless Education Program instrument. And now we're going to turn it over to the educator effectiveness with Anita.
All right, thank you, Debbie. Okay, we're almost there. Okay, we've gone through 2/3 of the presentation. We only have 1/3 left. I see some smiles already. So next we'll be going over the Educator Effectiveness Funds Block Grant. So in 2021, the California state budget allocated $1.5 billion to LEAs through the Educator Effectiveness Funds Block Grant, and established by Assembly Bill 130 and then later updated with Assembly Bill 181. It really has the great potential to impact staff who work with students, which in turn greatly will impact the academic well-being and future of all of our students. And as with any grant, we know that there are requirements, there are rules and accountability measures that must be followed. But first, before we get to all the conditions of apportionment, I'd like to provide an overview either as a refresher for returning folks or as a quick summary for those new to their position. Funds are allocated per certificated and classified full-time equivalent as reported in CalPADS and CBEDS from the 2020-21 fiscal year. Funds are provided to county offices of education, school districts, charter schools, and state special schools. The purpose of the funds is to provide professional learning to staff who work and interact with students with the clear intention of promoting educator equity in quality and effectiveness. There are 11 allowable uses for the funds that focus on areas such as coaching and mentoring, programs that improve instruction and literacy across the subject areas, strategies that accelerate learning, strategies to implement social emotional learning, practices to create a positive school climate, strategies to improve inclusive practices, etc. The list of allowable uses of these funds is comprehensive and can be found with additional detail in the link provided on this slide. In a nutshell, allowable uses of funds provide the opportunity to raise the bar in educator effectiveness and quality across the state for the benefit of all of our students. The funds are available for use from the 2021-22 fiscal year all the way through the 2025-26 fiscal year. Ed Code 41480, Section D, outlines 3 conditions of apportionment. The first of these conditions deals with the Educator Effectiveness Funds Plan. The plan is developed by the LEA and delineates the expenditure of funds that includes the professional development of teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals, and classified staff who interact with students. The plan is then, and actually by now, already presented to the LEA's board or governing body at a public hearing. At a subsequent public meeting, the plan is adopted. So all of this, the development of the plan, the public hearing, and the adoption of the plan was to be completed on or before March 31st, 2023. And if you recall, this new date was an extension from the previous date. Originally, it was December 30th, 2021. The second condition of apportionment of receiving the funds according to Ed Code 41480D is that the LEAs will report detailed expenditure information to CDE on an annual basis. In this report, the LEAs will provide information on specific purchases made with the EE funds, including the number of staff who received professional development. And actually, the Ed Code says there's 2 dates, 2023 and then 2026, but CDE is saying we're going to do it annually. The annual report is due on or before September 30th of each school year until 2026. This means that the second annual report is due on or by this Saturday, September 30th by 4 p.m., not 11:59, 4 p.m. So on or before September 30th of 2026, the final data and expenditure report will be due to CDE. So any funds that are not expended by June 30th of 2026 will be returned to CDE. Provided on this slide is a link to a video presented by CDE with specific instructions on how to complete the report online through their portal for your convenience. And I noted it was actually on minute 9 with 38 seconds, so you can just get started right there. The third condition of apportionment relates to fees charged to employees for services allowable under the EE funds. And I couldn't say it any other way, but that's a big no-no. So LEAs must ensure that no employees were charged a fee for services that are allowable under this grant for any of the 11 allowable uses, including beginning teacher induction program costs during the grant period. So I know that there are times when a teacher may choose to clear their credential elsewhere by personal choice, such as like through a university. If the teacher chooses to do that on their own accord, the LEA is not affected. However, please keep in mind that if employees are charged for EEF services, or if the LEA does not meet the conditions of apportionment that I shared in those 3 slides, right? The plan, the public hearing, the board meeting, allowable uses, and if you're charging, then the LEA will be required to return all of the funds. Yes, scary. Next. As I conclude this section, here are a few critical reminders to note. The second annual data and expenditure report is due on or before September 30th by 4 p.m. September 30th is like a popular date with CDE. Please be aware that auditors will review documentation to support the submission of expenditure reports. If the required reports are not submitted on time, then the funds will need to be returned. So therefore, please ensure that the report due by the 30th of this week is complete and submitted by the deadline. There is a reporting template and portal that is accessed with a password on the CDE website, and the link has been provided for you here on this slide in case you still need it. And you might be wondering about a couple things, such as whether or not you can revise your EF plan, and you can. If you revise your plan, your notes or your minutes should reflect that this is a revision for auditing purposes, and your plan only needs to go to board for approval once for this revision. Now, it is the expectation that your plan was originally approved by the board or governing body in the required manner, which was development of the plan, a public hearing, and then a separate adoption meeting by March 31st, 2023. But if you revise your plan after that, just has to go to board for adoption once. Also, when completing the report, if you have an expense that falls under more than one area of allowable use, only report the expenditure in one area of allowable use to avoid double counting. And if your LEA has already expended all the EE funds, you are still required to submit the second annual data and expenditure report by September 30th, 4 p.m. And we continue with state topics. That's it for this. And I'll hand it over to Jeannie, who has some LCAP updates for you. Thank you very much all for your time and attention.
Thanks so much, Anita, and good morning, everyone. If you can go to the next slide, please. Today's LCAP update focuses on the LEA's LCAP annual process. And here, a timeline visual is offered to assist an LEA to organize and operationalize their process, considering 3 key phases which are interdependent and occur over the course of the school year. In the fall, for example, LEAs begin annual implementation of their actions, monitoring expenditures, and monitoring multiple data results to determine effectiveness. In the winter and early spring, LEAs engage in a goal analysis for each of the LCAP goals. And this year will be especially important to present a mid-year update to the governing board by February 28th. This is a new requirement. In the spring, LEAs will use their analysis, including input from educational partners, to inform the development of their plan for the next year. Within each phase in the LCAP process, the timeline identifies processes and collaboration that connect to the categories included in the LCAP template. Each phase in the timeline identifies strategies for oversight and support related to, specifically, actions, expenditures, and their effectiveness, and how engaging educational partners and the governing board may occur. This year, as the template is being revised to address legislative changes, it is especially important for LEAs to support their process for implementation and reflection on effectiveness of their actions in their current LCAP. So they are well positioned to address their local needs and prioritize planning that addresses equity of outcomes in the next 3-year LCAP cycle. Additionally, the timeline document linked at the bottom of the slide offers a consideration and reflection section where questions are provided that may assist an LEA's leadership team and cabinet to outline a meaningful and transparent LCAP process. Soon, we will add some revisions to the timeline to incorporate pending revisions to the LCAP template. You will also notice on the slide a new mid-year reporting requirement for LEAs, that is the LCAP and LCFF Budget Overview Mid-Year Report. We'll look at this requirement on the next slide. You may know that per Senate Bill 114, the Education Omnibus Trailer Bill that was approved this summer, LEAs must present a report on the annual update to the LCAP and the LCFF budget overview on or before February 28th each year at a regularly scheduled governing board or body meeting. This requirement for the mid-year report is included in Education Code 47606.5, 52062, and 52068, which apply to charter schools, school districts, and county offices of education. Moving on to the next slide, we're going to highlight some items that may be included in the fall phase of your LCAP process. The first item addresses implementation. Here, an LEA may identify staff who are responsible for support and oversight of specific actions in the LCAP goals. These staff can collect implementation data so the LEA can share what is being implemented across school sites. The timeline suggests collecting the information to align with the goal analysis prompts, where LEAs report overall implementation of actions, successes and challenges with implementation, and reporting how any actions may have been implemented differently from what the LEA planned. Next is budget oversight. And this is key. Oversight of expenditures is essential. So as an LEA monitors and shares what is occurring, there will be alignment between expenditures and implementation. In the fall, LEAs can identify fiscal staff and systems to track and report estimated actuals, and a process to work with program staff to describe expenditures for actions, including and identifying and describing where there may be differences between what was planned and what is being implemented. Additionally, the third item addresses progress monitoring and oversight for this monitoring, so staff can share results and determine effectiveness for each of their LCAP goals. This includes identifying how the LEA will monitor and implementation and progress toward LCAP goals. LEAs can identify staff responsible to collect and share multiple sources of data, including survey data, and to organize how educational partners will provide input about the impact and effectiveness of actions and expenditures. Reflecting on the effectiveness of actions and performance of student groups continues to be foundational to the local improvement process. As you know, proposed revisions to the LCAP template include the goal analysis in a standalone annual update that will address the 23-24 LCAP and serve as a bridge to the next 3-year LCAP cycle. So it will be especially important to really take a critical and thoughtful look at the effectiveness of actions this year. As you can see, identifying staff and processes that support implementation and monitoring of actions and expenditures is really key to providing transparency so the local community can engage in a meaningful goal analysis later in the year. The last starred item on the slide suggests maintaining a system to keep this information collected from all of those who are closest to the work so that it can be used to inform the goal analysis. This year, your annual update process may also inform the presentation for the LCAP and LCFF budget overview mid-year report previously discussed. And it will also be critical in determining what actions to continue or change in the next LCAP cycle. Moving on to the next slide. The Engaging Educational Partners section of the timeline provides some suggestions. First, to establish the 2 required advisory committees, the Parent Advisory Committee and the English Learner Parent Advisory Committee, and to share the LCAP plan and timeline with each of these committees. Additionally, included in the fall is a process for sharing the LCAP with district personnel at school sites. This would ensure that parents, staff, and students understand the plan and how it supports their schools and students, and what increased or improved services are planned to address unique needs, conditions, and circumstances of English learners, foster youth, and low-income pupils in the current school year. Additionally, the timeline includes a section in each phase for board updates, and this includes keeping the board informed about the 2023-24 goals and suggests sharing the LEA system for monitoring implementation, expenditures, measuring results, and engaging educational partners. As LEAs are continuing to support the implementation and collection of data for their 23-24 LCAP, they will also want to keep their community informed about pending revisions to the LCAP template for the next 3-year cycle. While there are new requirements based on legislation that will be included in the template, the foundational process of LCFF is continuing. So LEAs should continue to support their year-long process to support implementation and a reflection process that informs the goal analysis and supports the LEA to prioritize their resources in the development of the 24-25 LCAP. Next slide, please. As LEAs are mapping out their annual LCAP process, the timeline reminds that local indicators and the LCAP are presented together when the plan is adopted by the board in June. This date should be established soon so that as LEAs are mapping out their timeline, they can ensure their process fully engages their educational partners and their board throughout implementation, goal analysis, and plan development. Next slide, please. You may be aware that Senate Bill 114 amended California Education Code, Section 52064, to require some additional revisions to the LCAP and annual update template and instructions. The revisions to the template and instructions will be in effect beginning with the 24-25 LCAP year. Among these revisions is the requirement that LEAs eligible for technical assistance include specific actions in the LCAP that address the needs of student groups eligible for assistance, and to include a summary of the work the LEA is doing as part of the technical assistance process. This would include LEAs eligible for differentiated assistance. Additionally, statute requires the template to clarify that long-term English learners are included as a significant student group and are a part of an LEA's English learner student group. Also, statute adds the requirement for LEAs to assess the effectiveness of their actions as well as the lack of effectiveness of actions. Another new requirement addresses an additional apportionment called the LCAP Equity Multiplier Funding. This additional apportionment is provided to schools based on a high instability rate, which is based on students who are not consistently enrolled in the prior school year, and a school's socioeconomically disadvantaged pupil rate. LEAs eligible for this funding will include a summary in the LCAP of how they consulted with educational partners at eligible schools in the development of the LCAP. As you are engaging with your educational partners and your board, it is important to keep them informed about legislative changes and related pending changes to the LCAP template, and how your continuous improvement process will address these requirements so that your LEA can reduce disparities in opportunities and outcomes between pupil groups. On the next slide, we take a look at some statute that addresses required revisions specifically to the LCAP template instructions. The first two bullets require instructions to add the requirement for LEAs to consider LEA-wide student group performance based on the upcoming dashboard, and to add the requirements that specific actions in the LCAP address school-level needs of low-performing identified student groups and/or overall school-level performance on the dashboard. Additionally, the instructions address performance reported for local indicators. You can see the next three revisions to instructions connect to requirements reviewed on the previous slide. Added to the instructions is the requirement for LEAs to include specific actions in the LCAP related to language acquisition programs and professional development for English learners, and actions that are specific to long-term English learners. The instructions must also address the lack of effectiveness of actions and indicate that LEAs must change the actions that have not been effective. Also, revisions to Ed Code require the instructions to address the requirements for LEAs receiving equity multiplier funding. The instructions address the allowable use of these funds for all student groups that have the lowest performance level on one or more state indicators on the dashboard, and any underlying issues in credentialing, subject matter preparation, and retention of school educators at these schools receiving the funding. So you can see there are some significant revisions, and these revisions, if we take a look on the next slide, are underway. The CDE has been working with educational partners and the state board to incorporate these required revisions into the LCAP template for the 24-25 school year. On this closing slide, you can see next steps and dates related to revisions for the 24-25 LCAP template and instructions. So the October 3rd date, what's going to occur here is based on feedback from the state board meeting in September, the CDE is continuing to revise a draft LCAP template and instructions that they shared at the September meeting. And so these revised LCAP draft templates and instructions will be shared with additional educational partners prior to the November meeting of the state board. And the LASSO office, which is the Local Agency Systems Support Office in CDE, is soliciting additional input from advisory groups and holding a statewide webinar on October 3rd to solicit additional feedback. They're also sending out through their listservs call for public comment regarding these revisions. Then at the November state board meeting, the LCAP revisions will be brought as an action item for adoption. And then beginning in November, CDE begins a series of Tuesdays at 2, Thursdays at 3 LCAP trainings. And the registration link included on the slide is for these trainings that CDE will be providing beginning in November. So this gives you the latest on the status of these revisions. And now I'm going to turn it over to Debbie for some additional reminders.
Thank you, Jeannie. Okay, we're rounding up our meeting. I just have two quick reminders for you. First is our Title III annual survey. And the reporting window is currently open for these annual online surveys. The deadline is coming up on October 9th, 2023. These annual online surveys are required under ESSA for Title III English Learner Program subgrantees, as well as Title III Immigrant Student Program. So if an LEA receives one or both of the Title III English Learner Program or the immigrant funds, then they need to require both surveys or need to submit both surveys. If you only receive the English Learner Program, then you need to fill out that one survey. For the Title III English Learner Program, the survey questions related to the implementation of language instruction programs in the LEA during the 22-23 school year, regardless of whether the Title III funds were used. The person assigned to oversee the Title III language instruction program in the LEA should complete the survey. For the Title III immigrant student program, the survey consists of 2 questions regarding the Title III funded activities in which immigrant students in the LEA participated during the 22-23 school year. And the person overseeing the Title III immigrant student services should complete this survey. The link to the online reporting webpage for both programs are included on the slide. A letter and a pin to complete the online report was sent to the superintendent from the CDE at the end of August. And also just wanted to note, if you are new in your position and have no idea what was said in the last survey, you can contact the Title III survey office and ask for a copy of your responses from last year's survey. And it's a good idea before you submit to download a copy of that and just to keep a file so you know what was reported last year. Okay, we're going to the next slide. Next, another reminder is regarding the 15% translation requirement per Education Code 48985, which says when 15% or more students enrolled in a public school speak a single primary language other than English as determined by the language census data from the previous year, all notices, reports, statements, and records sent to the parents or guardians of such students must be written in English and the primary language. So how do we find out this information? On the screen, you can see that there's a report available from DataQuest that you can access to determine which schools in your LEA meet this 15% translation requirement. We've included the screenshots to the steps to access the report on DataQuest. First, you will select the level, which is district, and then English learner data. Next, you are going to the next page where you would enter the specific year and then the name of your district. On the next screen, you'll select the report titled Language Groups by School Determined to Meet 15% and Above Translation Need. It's at the very bottom. To generate the list of schools that meet the 15% translation requirement. This list will only include those schools that meet the requirement, and it will include the languages that are required. So for some schools, you would get more than one language that would be required. Next slide, please. And lastly, a reminder to everyone that tomorrow is the deadline for the local indicator submissions to CDE. So this should not be the first time you are hearing about this. And if you are not the responsible for the submission, it might be a good idea just to confirm with that person who is. Our data literacy counterparts have reached out from counterparts from LACO have reached out to the LEAs that have not logged on to the CDE for this purpose. So they have tried to reach out to anybody who they received a report saying these LEAs have not logged into the system. A letter was sent dated August 27th, 2023 via email with the login information to the superintendents of the LEAs. And so maybe it ended up in spam for those that didn't log in. Your superintendent will have the directions in that letter to authorize an alternate, and you just need to follow the instructions from that letter. And again, the information must be submitted by Friday, September 29th, or you risk receiving a not met on the dashboard. So this is especially critical for the LEAs that received a not met last year. Don't want a not met 2 years in a row. If you are having difficulty with this, or you want to confirm anything, you would need to contact the LCFF office. And this is the information there, the CDE contact information is there on the screen for you. Okay, so that concludes our meeting for this morning. And next slide. We have an evaluation for today's meeting. And so you can follow the link, or we have a quick QR code there. We do really review the feedback, and we will use it for the suggestions for future meetings. And we appreciate any insight you can offer us. And our next meeting is Thursday, October 26th, again from 10 to 11:30. And if you have any questions, we'll stick around for a few minutes and try and address those in the chat for those that we are able to answer quickly. And if not, of course, as always, we will follow up with our Q&A. And last slide, this is our contact information if you need to get in touch with any of us. We're always here for you and happy to help. And so we hope you all have a great day.